One of the best ways to get better at coding interviews is to learn from other people's mistakes. That's why in this video, I'm going to be doing a teardown of a mock interview recording from interviewing.io. Let's go ahead and get into it.
Let's define a couple files here. So say this is a web app, and we have our entry point as well. So what I want you to do is write me a program that takes in these files and outputs the directory structure, including the files as well, in a specific format. This is a fun one. Yeah, like this would be a possible solution. There's also other solutions as well. So here's another one. So it'll be like this.
All right, so before we get into the sample solution here, as we go through this, I want you to pause the video as we go and think about what you would do here. So your interviewer just explained to you the question. He's given you a couple examples. What is the next step that you should take?
So, and I was planning on writing this, doing this assignment in Python, if that works. It seems like in principle, this could be sort of like a bash question, but did you have anything in mind?
No, Python's excellent for this. I would say another good one is Java if you feel comfortable, but Python totally works for me.
Okay, good. Yeah, I actually don't, I'm not so good at Java, so maybe Python is better. Let's see here.
Cool, sounds good.
So first of all, let me just put in here a couple of functions that I'm going to need, and it might. I'm just going to put a function isdir, and it'll take in a string which represents the file name, and it'll tell me if the function is a directory as opposed to a file. So it should return a Boolean, and there probably is a built-in function that does that. So I'm kind of showing my ignorance here by not knowing it, but I'm just going to assume that function exists, and alternately I could write is file, or is is not directory.
Okay.
I'm going to need to know that. Let's see. And I'm looking at the format you gave me. Okay.
So the first thing that our interviewee did is he started by writing a helper function. And this feels a little bit random, right? Helper functions are good. They're a really good thing for us to use in our mock interviews, but is this really the best place for us to start? This is something that we could figure out later. And now he kind of got this out of the way and he's still trying to figure out, okay, what am I even doing in the first place? A better place for our interviewee to start would have been to go through the inputs and outputs, as well as a couple examples of the problem. We're given this example where we can see that our input is a list of strings, but we don't really know what the format of our output is, and we haven't defined that. Our interviewer just said it should be some format. So I'd really like to clarify more what that means so that we can get more clarity around what it is exactly that we're doing.
Okay. So what is my input to this function? Is it the root directory as a string?
No, so your input to this function would be a list of files, because essentially we want to parse that file system structure and then print it out.
Oh, okay, good. That's a whole different problem. Okay, good. I'm glad I asked.
Okay, so there you see he just asked our interviewer what the input was. And when he got an answer to it, he was like, oh, so that's a totally different problem than what I thought it was, right? He spent all this time kind of in his head thinking about what is the solution that I'm going for here. And now he has to start over again because he didn't start with those inputs first. So this is where really understanding the question that you're being asked and really understanding what it is that you need to do is so, so important.
Let's see here. And for instance, if I notice that the 4 files you've given me share a common directory, but that needn't be the case, I'm assuming. So there may be more than one, I guess. If you call the root directory just slash, but there could be more than one directory on the level directly beneath the root directory. Is that correct?
Okay, so that's a good call out. It will actually make your life more difficult if it is, without giving too much away. So let's assume everything is under slash web app.
Yeah, so that's a really good clarification there. Just shows that he's understanding what the problem is that's being asked.
Oh, can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, like let's assume that everything is under the first, like in this case, it would be web app. The first root directory would always be the same.
Okay, everything is under, there's only one file in the root directory, let's say, that we care about. In this case, web app is that file, and we can assume that there's no others.
Yeah, like web app would be the directory though, right? I know you said file. Web app would be the directory.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, maybe I'm using incorrect terminology. When I say file, I mean to say whatever the word is that could be either a file or a directory. I don't know exactly what word to use for that.
I see. Okay. Just to be specific, though, let's assume that it's always a directory. Like there's always a top-level directory, and it's always just
Okay.
a directory. Yeah.
That's a good assumption to keep in mind. Okay, so there's just a top-level directory and only one, so there's just a unique top-level directory. Okay. Okay.
And I guess like just one very quick hint, because I don't want to throw you off here. Don't like fix on that top-level directory. It doesn't change much. Like for you solutioning out, it's not productive to focus too much on that. It's just if it wasn't there, your solution might be a lot more complicated.
So at this point, one of the things that I would be thinking about doing is coming up with some sort of brute force solution to this problem, right? At this stage, it's not about coming up with an optimal solution, but in terms of a brute force solution to this problem, it's not super complicated, right? We just need to do something where we're going to split up everything into, what are our strings, what are our directories and files, and then figure out how to combine them. So I would be probably, in an ideal world, drawing this out. Even though this is a virtual interview and it's on, whatever platform this is, I would be thinking about drawing something out and explaining what I'm doing, or working through an example and understanding how that works. Because right now we have no idea what our interviewee is thinking, right? We have no idea what he's thinking. It's like the gears are turning in his head. So at least I'd want him to say, hey, let me think about this for a moment, rather than just going radio silent.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So this is kind of silly, but I know that I'm going to need a file to, okay, so my input is a list of strings, right?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Okay. Oh, my keyboard's going a little janky here. Okay. So that'll be my main function. And it's just going to print, right? It has no return value. Is that correct?
Hey, I'm sorry, I was muted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. Yeah, you don't have to return anything, just print it.
Okay, good. So I'll make myself a little function here that says remove initial character.
Yeah, so again, I think that I would prefer him to figure out what functions that he's going to need as he's actually writing the solution. Right now, he's kind of spewing out a lot of helper functions, and me as the interviewer, or this as the interviewer, is not clear on why he's doing this or what exactly he needs. So it would be really helpful, I think, to map out what is it that I'm trying to do first, at least at a high level, and then we can figure out, okay, what helper functions am I going to need to do that? What would make my life easier, rather than saying, okay, let me map out a bunch of helper functions and then somehow figure out how to match them together later.
I don't know if I'll end up using that or not, but it should be a string in.
And there you go. I don't know if I'm going to need to use that or not. So he's wasting time writing something that he doesn't know if he's going to need to use.
Put. Okay. I'll put pass there. Okay, so print files is going to do that. Okay, let's see. Okay, well, because of the format that you've given me, conveniently, I can start printing right away. So in other words, like, there's no need for me to delay any printing once I see the first line of the input. Well, actually, you wrote, yeah, it doesn't. So apparently, from your examples, it doesn't matter in which order I put the subdirectories, right? Like assets versus well, index is not a directory, but like HTML could come before JS, or the other way around, for instance. Or do they need to be in a certain order?
No, they don't have to be in any order. It's just arbitrary directories, yeah.
Okay, so this is kind of nice. So I can actually just start printing right away, and I probably don't have to remember that much. I have to remember like the current directory that I'm in. So maybe let's see here. So it might be something like finding a common root with a given file or something. Let's see here. So once I get that, I know I need to go down there. So yeah. So essentially, what's going on here is I'm every line that I come across, I need to print a directory sort of I need to print a list of things that end up being a file. So if I look at the first thing that says web app JS CJS, can you see that highlighting that I've done there?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So that I can see that as one thing. So really, I should think of it as I'm printing the first 3 lines represent of the print of output represent one thing, which is the c.js file, and the printing format comes from a list, each of which is like the path to that file. So think of the path to c.js, for instance, like a list of strings, which are dir names, okay, and plus lastly a file name. So what I want to do is I want to make a function that says that print path, and it's going to take in a list of, so I'll call it path, which is going to be a list of strings, and it's going to output none. And what it's going to do is I'm going to give it a list of strings. Hopefully this is becoming clear what I'm going for here. So print path of web app, this will be strings, web app, comma, assets, comma, let's say JS, because we were taking the other example, JS, comma, c.js will print these first 3 lines. So all that print path needs to do is sort of, I think docstrings needs 3 quotes like that. So I want to say just print the list, print each string on its own line, each indented, with dashes, I guess, each printed with an extra indentation.
So one thing that I'm noticing here that you definitely want to think about in your interview, and we'll see how he actually does with this, but you really want to think ahead. And what I mean by this is that a lot of times in interviews, people end up in a situation where they were making a decision on the fly. They were like, okay, this is going to work for this, but they don't actually think ahead to that next thing. So my immediate thought with this is that he's creating this, standalone function that is going to print out a series of, a directory hierarchy. But what happens when you have multiple files in that hierarchy? How is that actually going to be represented here? And I think there are some solutions to this, but it would be good to be thinking about this now, because if, let's say in this example, he had, assets HTML a.html and assets HTML b.html, is he going to pass that whole string both times, in which he's printing that whole hierarchy again? Is he going to pass all those files inside as like a sublist, which would be an interesting way to get around this, but that's going to add more complexity to the code? It's something that would be good to be thinking about at this stage, because he's going to have to deal with this later. And that's not really something that you want to be doing once you get to the coding part of the problem. Like a lot of times people end up in this situation where, they came up with a solution and then they start coding it up and they realize, oh, I didn't think ahead to this other scenario, and then it becomes much harder to deal with, versus if you deal with that at the beginning in how you are structuring your approach to the problem.
So now, what I need to do is, when I get a new file, is, okay, so also I need to, this is interesting. Okay, so in the example that you gave, web apps, like all of the files that are in a HTML subdirectory are together. But I'm guessing that I cannot assume that that would be the case in general. Is that right?
Yeah, that'd be right.
Okay, so it might be worth doing a sort of a sort on the initial file so that I can assume that. Now, the thing that I would want to think about is there any way that that could bite me? Like if I do, supposing I sort the input and I just say, here is like files equals list sorted files, is that going to come back to bite me somehow in that, first of all, what's the problem here? It says undefined name list. Okay, so I need to import list from typing. So is there any reason that that should not guarantee me that all of the files that are in a common subdirectory will be together? So I don't know, it seems like that would work. Do you have any objection to that solution? To that, that step in the solution, to sorting it like that? Are you there?
Oops, sorry, I was muted again. Okay, so this is kind of interesting. I see what you're doing here. Okay, I've never seen the solution, so I think what you're kind of doing is like, I'm just trying to understand.
Can I try to explain it one more time?
Sure. The only one thing I will say, and this is something that trips people up commonly when they just think of like a simple solution, is just keep in mind that you're not duplicating the parent directories for each one. Like for a.html and b.html, they're both just under HTML, and that's not printed twice, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so here we're like, he's identifying this same problem, right, that we talked about. And, you know, it was an interesting, different problem that I hadn't even thought of that our interviewee came up with, which is that, you know, you could have a directory that contains another directory and also a file. And so that is something that we have to deal with as well.
So yes, I agree. So my plan was that in order to determine what needs to be printed for each line, for each entry in the files list. So far, so good. So I'm trying to go from entry in the files list to what needs to be printed. So first, I'm going to take a sort of greatest common directory with the previous item in the list, and then that will help me determine, or least common directory, or however we want to say it. That will help me determine what to print. So if I'm looking at web app/asset/b.html, I can say, okay, well, last thing that I did was print a.html, so I don't need to reprint these things here. And therefore, what I'm going to send to the print path function is a singleton list that is just b.html. Because of that information. Now, if A and B did not appear, if between a.html and b.html there was another file that lived in the JS directory, for instance, that would kind of break my approach because they wouldn't be gathered together, and I wouldn't be able to look at the previous entry to determine what I needed to print. And that's the function of calling sorted there. Does that help you understand better what I'm going for?
Yeah, it definitely helps me understand more. I'm just curious kind of how you're going to implement it. I will give you one hint just to kind of simplify your solution, because it's still possible that this will work, but I think perhaps a simpler way would be kind of to just parse this into some sort of data structure, and then that data structure will kind of like inherently remove any duplication. And, you know, just one quick traversal of that will give you the correct answer you're thinking.
Yeah, so this, I think, makes a lot of sense. What he said, what the interviewer is saying, is that parsing it into some sort of data structure. Basically, with any sort of file system, we essentially have a recursive data structure, right? It essentially functions like a tree, where you have, you know, the directories, and then you have the subdirectories, and then the subdirectories of that, and subfiles, and whatever. Now, I think that's probably a good approach here that I would recommend that our interviewee take. One thing that you should keep in mind is that if you are presenting a solution and your interviewer says something like what our interviewer said here, which is that I've never seen an approach like this before, then that probably means one of two things, or one of three things, actually. One is that you really do have some novel approach and it's going to work great. That is okay if you're very confident in your solution. But more likely, it's one of the other two things, which is one, this is a suboptimal approach. It's a suboptimal approach, and it would be better to at least take a step back and think, am I going the right direction? Right? Zoom out for a second and say, are there other ways I could be approaching this problem that would be more helpful? And then three, the other possibility is that you're just explaining it in a very bad way or a very unclear way to your interviewer. Right? It's possible that you are doing the thing that they have seen before, but you're just explaining it or approaching it in a very weird way that they're not familiar with. So in a case like that, it would be good to, you know, take a step back, make sure that you really are doing what makes sense, consider like other possible approaches, and then if you still really think that you're going the right way, try re-explaining your full approach to your interviewer and see if they understand it and if that makes sense to them.
Okay, that'll work. Okay, then.
Yep. Okay, it's up to you though. If you feel confident in this one and you want to do it, it could still be okay as well. So I'll leave it up to you.
Well, I mean, it just so naturally forms a tree, doesn't it? So it just makes sense to put things in a tree of some kind.
A
So
tree.
maybe we'll do it that way. Okay. So you recommend making a little class, so node, and then we'll say that each node has a string, and
I think yet again, our interviewee is kind of jumping into coding without really fleshing out the solution, right? It's so much better if you can take the time to flesh out, like, this is my full solution end to end, and then code it up. You should really, the coding part of your interview should basically be a translation job. You should be translating your thoughts into code, your structured solution into code. You shouldn't be trying to figure out what to do while you are coding the problem, because that's where you run into issues where you didn't think things through properly, or you didn't fully understand the solution, and then you end up coding something that's not the right approach.
We'll say def init self s string self dot name equals, well, I don't know, name is probably a reserved term, isn't it? So I'll say self dot node name equals s. And I also need to, it needs to have some children. So I will say def add child and that will be self, and s is string, and then I will say self.children. Let's say this. How about this? So if self.children append node s,
Okay.
and then I will say else self.children equals a list containing node of s. Okay, so that seems to make sense. This is just an n-ary tree. There's no limit on the number of children a given guy can have.
Okay.
I may have forgotten something, but if so, I'll go back and make it. And then I probably won't need this print path function. So let me just comment that out. We'll just move everything to the bottom. Okay, so now let's just go into the main function. So just print files of files, which is a list of strings, and it returns none. And then we'll say, so the first thing we want to do is, I mean, really our print file function should do only two things, one of which is.
So I know I sound like a little bit of a broken record here, but I would love for him to actually map out broadly, like here's what's going to happen first. Doesn't have to be full pseudocode. It doesn't have to be everything that's going on, but just before figuring out like exactly what goes in that function, just do like, comments. Okay, first we're going to do this general thing. Then next we're going to do this general thing. And then you have that structure. You can literally fill the code into the blocks there and map out the whole thing. It again just is going to help him to really understand exactly what he's doing before he starts coding it up.
Build tree from files. Okay, and then it should do the last thing, which is print tree of tree. I mean, that's really what essentially is going on. And yep. Why is it?
Now, see, this is better where he used the functions first before defining them, right? Notice how he had to delete all the functions that he defined before because they weren't relevant to his solution after all that, because he started with those helper functions first. Now, in a case like this, he has that helper function defined, and so it's going to be he has that like main function defined, so he can define the helper functions very clearly, saying like, first I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this.
Undefined. Oh wait, I haven't defined it yet. So of course. Oh gosh, this happens to me. I keep locking myself out of my computer accidentally. Okay, so now let's make a build tree. So let's say def build tree from nodes. Well, from files, which is a list of strings, and it outputs a node, which is the head, and we'll do that in a second. And we'll just say another function is called def print tree, which takes in a node, which is the root of the tree, and root, which is a node, and outputs none. Okay, and that we'll figure out what that means in a second. Oh gosh, I keep locking myself out of my computer. Okay. So what should we do first? Let's see. There's build tree and there's print tree. How much time do we have? We are on 29 minutes here, so maybe not going quite as fast as I would like, but we'll get it done. Okay, so build tree from files. What I want to do is I want to say something like split it on the slashes. So I can extract this into its own function. If I were a Python Jedi, I should know exactly how to do it. So let's say
oh, that's cool. You can make something up. No worries, man.
Okay. Parse file name into list, and it's going to take in a string path, which is a string, and it's going to output a list of string. Okay, so we'll also do that in a second. But so build tree is going to say for path in files. First, it's going to say list path as list equals parse file name into list of path, and then what don't you like about that? Local variable defined to the never use. Okay, whatever. So now I'm going to go through the list and add the node to the tree if it's not already there. So I should probably have a little auxiliary function that says add to tree, add node to tree, and this is going to be root node, and it's going to do nothing because it's going to modify it in place. And okay, so then I'm going to say path as list equal to parse is equal to that. For I don't know, item in path as list. Well, actually, you know what? I should just pass the entire list into add node to tree because I don't need to go through everything again and again. So why don't I just make it list node, list of node,
okay.
And then, but it's not going to necessarily be a root. It's going to be like a path. So for item in path as list, now I don't need to do this. I should just say for path in files, path is list is this, and I'll say add node to tree, which is path as list. And that should really take care of it once I implement that function. And then down here, it'll return, so let's say, first of all, yeah, I mean, this will actually do everything. I just need to make sure I have the root node available. So maybe, I don't know, parse file name into list, or rather add node to tree could take in a root as well. So let's say root path is list. It's hard to say exactly what we want here. So obviously.
Yeah, it is hard to say what we want exactly. It would be really good to get very clear on what each of these functions are doing, right? We need to, there's a lot of kind of iterating on the code. And again, this is where being clear on what it is that I'm trying to do and then coding it up is going to be so much more helpful. Because right now, we don't really know what it is that we're passing into this function. What exactly does this function do? Right? We have a function named add node to tree, but is that function adding a single node? Is it adding a path? If it's adding a path, are we defining what the path is that node has to go into? What happens if that path doesn't already exist? There are a lot of kind of open questions here where it would be really good if we could define that first and then code up something that does exactly that.
What tree I'm going to add it to at some point, so root node, and I'm going to need to create the root in build tree somewhere. So that needs to happen. So let's say root equals a node, just blank string at first. And then in add node to tree, I might need to populate the root. So I'll need to make sure to check if the root is empty, just for if the root dot node name is empty. Okay, so let's get back to business. For path and files, add node to tree, do that stuff. That seems like all we need in principle for that function. And now let's go down to print tree. So that means that we just need to do basically I want to say I'm just making sure I'm saying it correctly. So pre-order versus post-order and in order. It looks like we only want to print the leads, obviously, but actually what we really want to do is an in-order traversal. So basically this is just going to be traverse in order. Oh, actually, I just need to make sure I'm saying the right terminology here. So in this case, we want every item first, and then its children. But actually, we want to first print the item and then go eagerly to the first child and print that, and then go down and print that. So that's interesting. I'm just trying to remember exactly what that order of traversal is called. Traverse. I should remember that in a second. So traverse in.
Yeah, no, man. I don't know where you're going with that. It's pre-order traversal.
Oh, tree order. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So root children. Excuse me. Oh my God. Tree order traversal. Printing formatted names. Okay. So how's that going to go? It's going to say current node equals, so let's see, what we want to say is if not node, if not root, just return. So if I pass it none, I want to return. And, but I probably won't be passing it none, I'm guessing, as it turns out. So I'll say, oh, this is interesting, because I kind of need to remember how many spaces I'm indented, don't I? Because if I so let's say print tree root node, so I'll make a print tree helper, which takes in
Yeah, I think we're getting to the point now where it's like I'm all for helper functions, but we have so many helper functions now, right? It's getting really hard to keep track of everything that's going on. And so this, again, comes back to, and I'm going to keep saying it, but it's planning out what you're going to do before you do it, and then making sure that things are as clear as possible. Because there's a balance between having helper functions and then, like with Python, for example, if we want to print something, if we want to, have a pass in like the depth that we are in the tree, we could just use that as an optional parameter in or like a default parameter in our main function. We don't need to write a whole separate function here. So yes, that's a minor detail, but we're just adding, I mean, this is what, the sixth or seventh function that is taking us to solve this problem, which this whole problem, yes, it's nice to have a couple helper functions, but I haven't done the math on this, but I'd say maybe four, right? Four would be a good number. Beyond four, it starts to get really complicated, and it's like, can we just do this in line?
Well, actually, I'm not sure I need that, do I? So, well, the problem is if I say a new line, it just takes me right to the beginning of the next line. So I do kind of need to know the current indent, don't I? So
this is also something where, he could store those in the indent or the depth in the node of the tree too, right? There are a lot of different ways that he could do this. So one is that he could track that function, but two, if he planned ahead and he knew that he needed those indents, he could just say, okay, in those nodes, when I construct the tree, I'm going to add a depth parameter, or I'm going to add a depth value as well to each node. So that way he just does this pre-order traversal and then prints it out based on the depth and the value of the node.
If not root return, we know that. We'll put passing to make it happy for a second. And we'll say print tree helper of root, and the first one has indent 0. Okay, that's good, and it'll know to print the dashes and stuff. And so then up on print tree helper, we'll say, oh, do you care if there's a new line at the end of everything or not? Like at the end or not at the end or at the beginning, does that matter to you?
You know what? I'm not super worried about it. So yeah, it's totally cool.
Okay. So print tree helper is going to say, first it's going to say, first print string, which I've just built, so spaces. So let's say spaces equals 1 space times indent. And then I'll print spaces. So, or like if spaces. Let's say spaces equal to nothing, and if indent spaces plus equals that. And then I'll print spaces. And then I will say, and I mean, probably this should be extracted into its own little function, but we could do that if we want to. All right. Now, print dash dash. Now print the root dot node name, which is a string. And there should be one, so we shouldn't expect to run into the error where the root has no name, unless you give me an empty list, but I should probably check for that in the main file, so in the main function rather. So if not, files just return print nothing. Okay, and then here we're on print tree helper, print the node name, and then
this might be a minor detail, and it sounded like this guy might not be a Python developer as his primary role, but it's bothering me that he's going to be printing everything out on separate lines, right? This is something where a formatting string and just putting it all into one would be so much better. And this is also something, honestly, there's no reason that he can't just Google that. Yes, he should ask his interviewer first. He could say something like, do you mind if I look this up real quick? Or he could just, it's before his interviewer said that he didn't really care too much, and I'm not sure that they're even going to get time to run this anyway. But he could just put something that he thinks is going to work, or put some faux helper function for this. But the way that it's going to be right now, it's going to have spaces on one line, then dashes on the next line, then the name on the next line, which kind of defeats the purpose of the formatting that we have here. Because it's like, okay, if you have spaces on that line, on that first line, and those are on a line by itself, you're not actually getting indentation anyway.
Also print a new line. And then for child in root.children, we're going to print tree helper of child, comma, indent plus 2, right? Because we want to advance 2 spaces on each line, as I understand it. So that makes sense, I think, as long as there's only one root. So we start with no spaces. If there's an indent, do that. Each stack frame has its own space variable. When I print the spaces, then I print the dashes, then I print the node name, and then for each child, I print that, and then I come back, and then I return. So I just forgot to put return. And space that out a little bit to make it a little more easy to read. And yeah, that makes sense. So shouldn't be calling it if there's no children. Okay. Yeah, so any tips real quick before I just kind of finish implementing it? I'm not going quite as fast as I wish I was, but that's part of my thing I'm working on here. So before I finish doing everything else, do you have any tips or any input?
No, I mean, I think it's going pretty well.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, I'll finish up. Okay, so I think that my print files function's done. Build tree is this done yet? So for passing files, path is list is equal to parse file anything. Add node to tree. I think that is good. Yeah. So now I need to make sure I have this. Have print tree helper. That's good. Build tree. I need to make sure I have path as list and add node to tree. Okay. So path as list is oh, I called it path parse file name into list. Okay. So this one is basically just like this is something with Python string split, and I'll have to figure that out in a second. That's probably the least important part, but important to get right. And then here I want to say add node to tree. Okay, so this is interesting. Now I have a root node and I have a path to list node, so this is kind of fun. So let's see, how exactly do I want to do this? So if root dot node name, if not root dot node name, root dot node name is equal to path 0, because I shouldn't be passing it an empty path. I'm always getting some kind of path. Okay, so that's just getting that out of the way. And now I want to say, so when I add a node to a tree, I want to check if, let's see. So for item in path, which is a list, maybe I'll remind myself that it's a list by writing it as path as list. For item in path as list, I'm going to say current node. So first I'll make the current node equal to the root. And then I'll say for item in path as list.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just need to make sure I'm doing this in a way that makes sense. So, so my current node starts out as the root, and the first item is going to be the root. So if, I don't know, if item is equal to current node, this is only going to obtain in the very first case, in the root case. So dot node name. Then I'll continue. Okay. Now, if item is in the current node dot children, then current node equals okay, this is interesting. So if it's in the children, I sort of need to get the index of it in order to reach it, don't I? So, you know, the children could be a set. I don't know. That's interesting. So I might maybe make the children a set. It's not really ordered, and that's kind of posing some extra difficulty on the problem. So I guess I'm kind of getting lost in details here, but so
I'll just give you as well. We have like about 3 minutes left, so
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Just giving me that heads up.
Yeah, so part of getting lost in the details here too is again a result of we've been jumping around between different functions. And so if you are going to define a helper function, you need to very clearly define what is the behavior of that helper function going to be. Because you're going to come back to this later, you're going to review it, and like you're going to solve it at a different point. And so you need to know exactly what it is that you're solving, or you're going to run into problems like this. Right now, I don't honestly remember exactly what this function was supposed to do. I remember what I think it should do, but that may not be exactly the way that he's using it or the way that he's implementing it. And so even if he did have time to finish the code here, I'm guessing it would take a lot of time to debug everything just because we don't know exactly what's going on, right? We don't know exactly what these different functions are doing. And so it's really, really key that we take the time to just be clear. If you have clarity on what you're doing, then the coding part is relatively easy. Right? It's not trivial. I know it's not trivial, but the coding part is going to be so much easier if you know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
Okay. So current node is equal to, I don't know how I'm going to do this. So current node dot children of index of, so we'll say in here that index is equal to get index of item in current node dot children, and I forget how to do that in Python, which I should know. So we'll just say get index of X and L. So we'll do that in a second. Current node is that, and then I'll say continue. But actually, I need to, yeah, that's fine. But if it's not L, and if it's not in there, I want to say current node dot children dot append node of item. actually not in quotes, just straight up item. And then I'll say current node is equal to, again, I'm having this get index thing, so this is kind of dumb, but I have to fix this, but I don't really have time to fix it right now. So this is good practice to not do dumb things in the future. So item current node dot children. Again, we're doing this dumb get index thing. So current node equals current node dot children index. And now I continue. Okay, so that seems to make sense. Let's see what else is going on here. Sure wish I had written it well enough so that I was sure it was going to run. No, what's wrong with this path? Oh, path is list, yeah. Okay, current equals root. What's on here? Root. Oh, that's your cursor, I see. Okay, so
I feel like just out of time, unfortunately.
No problem. Yeah, well,
yeah, for sure. I'm actually stopping you a bit early because like I have quite a bit of feedback, and it's not necessarily from it being bad. It's so let me just explain this.
Okay, so we'll stop here. I'll link to this video below in case you want to check out the interviewer's feedback for yourself, because there's about 10-15 minutes of his feedback that's probably worth taking a listen to. As we watch this, hopefully there are a couple things specific that you took away from this. One, again, being really clear on what it is that you're doing before you do it is so key. If you're clear on what it is that you're going to do, then coding becomes a translation job. It's translating that conceptual algorithm into code. With things like tree traversals, that's really that fundamental data structure knowledge that you need to know for your interviews. Generally with this interview, I would say that he did decently, but not great, right? There was a lot of time at the beginning where he was playing around with different solutions that weren't really optimal for this interview. And he took the time to go down these paths that weren't the right path. If he had just been more organized in his thought process and really focused on what is the goal and where am I trying to get to, and made sure that he wasn't going down some rabbit hole that wasn't going to pan out, that would have been really helpful. Taking that step to zoom out and think about, okay, does this data structure, does this input data match some data structure that I'm familiar with that I could use? That's also a really valuable technique that he could have used here. So hopefully you found this helpful. If you want to see another video similar to this, go ahead and check out this video where I actually go through a mock interview just like this, and you can see how I approach the problems. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.